Baghdad, year of our reckoning, 861 AD. The hour is late, but the palace never sleeps. Behind latticed windows and rose-trellised courtyards, a different kind of power whispers in the dark. It does not thunder like armies, it seduces. The scent of oud clings to the silk of the curtains. Rosewater glistens on the marble floor like tears, and somewhere, hidden behind jewelled lamps and flickering flame, a boy waits. He cannot be older than 13, his skin pale from the snows of the Caucasus, his eyes darting, uncertain. His name is gone, replaced by silence. He has been cleansed, scrubbed, shaved, cut. They call him clean now, sanitized of desire, sterile in body, yet branded with expectation. He's no longer a child, nor a man. He is a eunuch. Tonight he will be led into the inner chambers of the Abbasid Caliph's palace, into a world of velvet cruelty, polished marble floors, and unspeakable submission. A brazier crackles quietly in the corner. The light dances on golden bowls filled with dates, figs, and narcotics. A scroll lies half open on the floor, its calligraphy ancient. Poetry, maybe. Or a contract. Footsteps echo down the hallway, soft, deliberate. Another eunuch enters, older, hardened, unblinking. He does not speak. He only gestures, and the boy obeys. He crosses the threshold into the unknown. But before we dive deeper into this world of shadows and seduction, if you're drawn to history's darkest secrets, hit that subscribe button, because what comes next will change how you see the Islamic Golden Age forever. The Abbasid Caliphate is remembered for its brilliance, for philosophy, astronomy, algebra, but its light cast long shadows, and in those shadows, desire ruled as ruthlessly as any sword. Here, power was not just seized on battlefields, it was whispered into silk pillows, traded in the silence of locked chambers, legislated through the bodies of the conquered. The Abbasid palaces were cities within cities, complete with their own laws, hierarchies, currencies of flesh. Each corridor told a different tale, each curtain concealed a different betrayal, and the boy, our nameless eunuch, was about to become one of the palace's invisible instruments. He would learn to walk without sound, to serve without being seen, to watch everything. Because it was not the caliph who truly knew what happened in his palace. It was the eunuchs. They carried secrets like ghosts. They buried scandals behind soft voices and expressionless faces. They stood at the edge of intimacy, witnessing pleasures they were forbidden to feel. And yet, in this inverted empire of pleasure and punishment, even they could become victims or weapons. Outside, the Tigris flows endlessly under the moonlight. Inside, another door opens. A woman's laugh flutters through the chamber like incense, delicate, dangerous. The boy flinches, the brazier hisses, he steps forward. This is only one room, in one, palace of one dynasty. But it is the first crack in a vast architecture of control, lust, and divine contradiction. The eunuch walks deeper into the harem, and he does not yet know. He will never walk back out the same. What lies beyond those silk veils is not merely pleasure, but power, dressed in perfume. And this is just the beginning. The Caliphate was built on the Quran, but behind palace doors another scripture was recited, one written in sweat, silk, and secrets. As our nameless eunuch entered the harem's perfumed grip, his story, tragic and invisible, was only a single thread in a larger tangled web, because above him, beyond the jasmine-scented corridors and mosaics of blue and gold, sat men cloaked in divine authority, the Caliphs, successors to the Prophet, voices of God, and patrons of pleasure. Harun al-Rashid, the jewel of the Abbasid crown. To the world he was a devout leader, a man of letters, science, and sword. But within his court, the boundaries of faith and flesh blurred. Harun was said to have an ear for poetry, a taste for music, and an appetite for beauty in all forms. Among his most prized possessions, a troop of gilmen, youthful, smooth-faced boys trained not for war, but for entertainment, and more. They were gifted in dance, song, and submission, not sons, Not soldiers, not slaves in name, but in essence. These boys were adorned in silks finer than most men's wedding robes, eyes cold, lips stained. They existed to orbit power, to reflect it, to absorb it, and for the Caliph, to own such boys was not seen as weakness, but proof of dominion. Desire was conquest, and conquest was divine. It was Harun's son, Al-Amin, who shattered the veil completely. Unlike his father, Al-Amin did not whisper. He declared. He paraded his male lovers openly, at feasts, in court, in the very mosques his subjects prayed in. He kissed them in daylight, composed verses in their name, and then commissioned others to sing them aloud. His favourite, a ghulam named Kauthar, was said to wear perfume stronger than any woman's, and jewellery fit for a queen. Al-Amin granted him audiences with governors, gave him voice in affairs of state, and when questioned by scholars, laughed. He once told his vizier, "What sin can there be in loving beauty, when God himself made paradise a garden of youthful boys?" The court poets followed suit. Abu Nuwas, the decadent wordsmith of Baghdad, penned verses that danced on the edge of heresy. "O wine boy with cheeks like Damascus rose, pour me a drink and keep your robe closed no longer." His poetry was celebrated, banned, burned, and resurrected. He was jailed, pardoned, exiled, and adored, because even as the jurists raged, the palace listened. What emerged in the Abbasid court was a paradox. Public morality demanded piety, but private power thrived on perversion, and in this contradiction the Caliph was both sinner and saint, master and slave to his own desires. Their lovers were boys without lineage, voices without rights, pleasure without permanence, and when they aged or spoke, they vanished. One such boy, Rahim, became famous not for his beauty, but for what he knew. He was kept in the court of Al-Mutawakkil, a caliph known for his paranoia, piety, and punishments. Rahim was said to have been literate, a rare trait among Gilman. He read letters, listened at doors, he knew the names of wives and the men who visited them. He knew who drank wine after prayer, who plotted uprisings, who touched whom, when, and how often. Then one night, he was gone. No burial, no farewell, just silence. Whispers said he was drowned in a fountain of jasmine petals, so no blood would stain the marble. Others claimed he escaped, his memory buried in a distant monastery, living under a different name. But in the palace, no one asked, because the walls, the very stones of Baghdad, had ears, and when boys knew too much, they were erased. What began as indulgence ended in institutional disappearance. The Gilman were never just lovers, they were currency, collateral, and sometimes liabilities. And so, the Caliphs built their own prisons, not of iron bars but velvet beds, where the price of pleasure was silence, but not all secrets stayed buried. Not every disappearance was successful, because once, one of them returned, and what he revealed tore through the Abbasid court like a whispered plague. That's where we go next. He arrived in chains, but not the clinking kind. No, his were softer, a linen blindfold, a collar of silk. He promised that he would serve something divine. He did not know where he was, only that his village had stopped screaming. 2 days ago, his name was Miro, Slavic. The last thing he saw was his sister's hand, torn from his, as he was pulled onto a cart bound south. That cart was one of hundreds, part of a network of shadows spanning the empire. From the coastal towns of Zanzibar, to the mountains of Armenia, to the frozen rivers of Rus, people were stolen like coin, traded, bartered, and delivered into servitude. It was a system, efficient, precise, brutal. They called them Ma Malakate Manukum, those whom your right hand possesses. But the right hand of the Abbasid Caliphate reached far. African captives, prized for their strength, sold into guard roles. Persian youths, favoured for their refinement, trained for courtly service. European prisoners, pale and unfamiliar, kept as objects of curiosity. But among them, none suffered more than those chosen for silence, the eunuchs. Castration was the price of entry, a blood toll to gain access to the sacred spaces of power. Most did not survive. Those who lived bled for days. A young eunuch, successfully healed, could be sold for more than a caravan of spices. They were shipped in silence, mouths sewn with fear, bodies bundled in cold cloth, tossed into slave ships under the guise of tribute. Their origins erased, histories burned, families left screaming in ash, and when they arrived in Baghdad, they were given new names, new languages, new gods. Then they were trained, taught how to serve, how to listen without reacting, how to walk without sound, how to smile without hope. They became shadows in gold-lined corridors, silent stewards of power, and sometimes instruments of punishment. The Moroccan traveller Ibn Battuta, writing over a century later, whispered of palaces where eunuchs controlled more than just the harem. They carried the keys, he wrote, not only to doors, but to secrets. Another chronicler, al-Masudi, hinted at darker truths. He described a man with no eyes, no tongue, no name, kept alive in a cell beneath the palace. A eunuch, punished not for betrayal, but for remembering too much. And yet, for all their suffering, their pain was rarely recorded. No chronicles, no elegies, only silence, except one, a scrap of parchment found decades later in a ruined madrasa near Wasit. Scorched at the edges, faded but legible. It was a fragment of a diary written in broken Arabic, the hand uneven. Likely written with trembling fingers, it read, "They call me Saeed. But I was once Yaroslav. My voice is gone, but I remember my mother's song. It smelled like bread. They made me forget everything, but not that. And then, in a darker ink, perhaps written later, or with more strength, I sleep in the corridor of women. They smile, but it does not reach their eyes. They bleed in silence like me. I think we're the same. They call it the garden, but it has no flowers." A pause, then the final line. "If I am to be forgotten, let the garden remember me." That garden is where we go next, where women were cloistered in golden cages, hidden from the world, but not from the gaze of power, and within that walled Eden, another kind of cruelty bloomed. They called it the garden, but there were no trees, no wind, no sky, only walls. Walls so high they swallowed sunlight by noon, and so thick they muffled even the sound of crying. This was the harem, a palace within the palace, a sanctum for the Caliph's most prized possessions, his wives, his concubines, his daughters, and his secrets. To the poets, it was paradise, silken robes, fragrant baths, laughter behind lattice screens, but to those who lived within, it was a velvet prison. Every step was watched, every breath weighed, every smile calculated. There were no friends in the harem, only rivals. Each woman, from the lowest concubine to the favoured queen, was trapped in an unending game. A war not fought with swords, but with glances, gossip, and wombs. To bear the Caliph's child was the highest victory. To miscarry was suspicion. To love another was death. They were bathed each morning in rosewater and musk, their hair combed with ivory pins, their skin inspected for blemishes, not for health, but for value. At night they waited in silence. A eunuch would come, whisper a name. One woman would be chosen. The rest would burn in envy. And envy was a dangerous perfume. Some women slipped henna laced with poison into rivals' bath oils. Others bribed eunuchs to plant lies, accusations of blasphemy, adultery, witchcraft. One accusation was all it took. A single rumour and a concubine could vanish. No trial, no farewell, just silence. But silence could be broken. Sometimes. A glance would last too long. A hand would brush against a guard's arm. A letter tucked beneath a pillow would be found. The punishments were legendary. A concubine named Zainab was once caught whispering through a slit in the wall to a palace guard. The next morning, her tongue was nailed to the door of the harem. The guard's fate was worse. His eyes were burned out with heated coins, so that he might carry her image forever. But even in this architecture of control, desire found cracks. In Samarra, beneath the Caliph's northern palace, archaeologists discovered something impossible: a sealed passageway, narrow and winding, running from the harem chambers to the slave quarters. Inside, remnants were found: burnt candle stubs, scraps of cloth, a single bronze bracelet with a concubine's mark. This wasn't escape, it was invitation. The Caliph may have owned their bodies, but some dared to give their hearts elsewhere. And sometimes they paid the price. A woman named Layla, beloved for her wit and grace, was said to be pregnant, but not by the Caliph. The palace whispered. The eunuchs watched. Then, her food changed hands. She fell ill. Within days, dead. But the child was cut from her womb before burial. No one saw him again. No one admitted his existence. Yet decades later, a boy with hazel eyes and noble diction emerged from the library of Kufa, schooled in Persian, Arabic, and court etiquette. Too refined for a scholar's son, too poised for a servant's child. Some say he was Layla's son, others say that's just legend. But one thing was certain: he knew the inner rituals of the harem too well. And as he rose through the ranks of the court, he carried a ring with a concubine's mark and a serpent engraved beneath. Perhaps the harem did not just breed pleasure, perhaps it bred revenge. Because what happened within those walls, the jealousies, the betrayals, the seductions, did not stay locked away. They spilled into history, into dynasties, into bloodlines, and behind every caliph's throne stood a woman who once waited in silence for a eunuch to whisper her name. But not all women remained silent. Some became queens, others became myths. And in our next chapter, we turn to those who watched them all: the jurists, the scholars, the holy men who claimed to see heaven but often looked away from hell. They said the Caliph ruled by divine right, that his shadow was the shade of God on earth. But shadows have secrets, and to protect those secrets, the court required more than soldiers and eunuchs. It needed scholars, qadis, imams, men draped in piety, who wore turbans like crowns and wielded ink as quietly as blades. Because when pleasure became policy and desire masqueraded as decree, it was theology that gave sin a halo. The Holy Book had verses, and they had interpretations. Ma malakat aymanukum, what your right hand possesses. It once meant captives. Now it meant bodies, property, flesh, legalized desire. A child, stolen from her mother's arms, could be claimed as a concubine. A boy, broken by castration, could be called a servant of paradise. And if the law resisted, the law was rewritten. In the mosques of Baghdad and Basra, fatwas began to appear, permitting sexual relations with girls who had not yet bled, permitting ownership of slaves as sexual tribute, permitting silence in the face of royal indulgence, the justification. The Prophet did not forbid it. But who recorded what the Prophet forbade? The Hadith, words passed down through generations, filtered, selected, compiled, and in the Abbasid court, altered. There are whispers that certain hadiths were forged, crafted to suit the pleasures of the throne, attributed to the Prophet, but spoken first by poets and viziers. One such hadith claimed, 3 things bring a man closer to heaven: a righteous prayer, a beautiful recitation, and the embrace of a soft servant. No chain of narration, no verification. Yet, it was quoted in court, and those who questioned, they vanished. The great Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, once held thousands of scrolls, philosophy, science, jurisprudence, but several shelves now stand empty, documents missing, catalogues altered, entire collections gone. Some say a scholar named Abu Zayd al-Marwazi compiled a treatise condemning the abuse of slave women in the Caliphate. he was summoned to the palace and never seen again. Others whisper of Umar al-Hanbali, a jurist who dared to challenge a Qadi's ruling on concubine rights. He was not killed. Worse, he was declared mad and spent his last days preaching to pigeons from a rooftop in Kufa. Because when power desires silence, it does not need execution. It only needs erasure. And so, the scholars fell into line, scripture bent like reed under wind, and the people believed. Because if a caliph sins in silk but the sermon says he is righteous, who dares to question? And if a boy disappears beneath palace floors but the imam declares him a gift of God, who weeps for him? Power did not follow theology. Theology followed power, and beneath every gilded minaret a darker verse was written. But not all men stayed silent. One wrote in the margins. One preserved the forbidden scrolls. One chose truth, and they tried to destroy him. But fire cannot burn a name already carved in stone. Next, we follow the trail he left behind, a journey into exile pages, erased witnesses, and the final attempt to reveal what history was never meant to remember. History does not forget. It is made to forget. And when forgetting becomes policy, truth dies quietly. The Abbasid Caliphate did not simply indulge in power, it curated its memory. Every forbidden scroll, every blood-stained pillow, every silenced witness was not merely erased, but replaced. They called it purification, restoration, a return to orthodoxy. But in truth, it was a burial of facts, of flesh, of failure. The great libraries that once held the whispers of eunuchs, concubines, poets, and heretics were emptied. Scrolls went missing, ledgers rewritten, ink faded overnight. Some say it was the Caliph al-Muqtada who issued the first secret edict, that all records of pleasure unbecoming to piety be gathered and burned. Others claim it was the scholars themselves, terrified of their proximity to corruption, who destroyed the evidence before it could destroy them. But one man refused. His name was Ibrahim al-Khatib, a librarian, a scribe, a ghost in the archives of Baghdad. In the year 1023 he vanished, but not before sending a sealed package to a distant madrasa in Bukhara. Inside, a single scroll, its ink faded, its contents explosive. An eyewitness account of concubine executions ordered by jealous queens, of eunuchs castrated twice so that they might never remember pleasure, of poetry struck from the record and rewritten with new authors, new verses, sanitized. The scroll bore one final line: what we do not protect, they will bury. What they bury, they will deny. What they deny becomes truth. Ibrahim was never found. No grave, no martyrdom, only silence. And into that silence, outsiders stepped in. Western Orientalists, centuries later, discovered fragments of this buried world, but they did not revive it. They romanticized it. They painted the harem as exotic paradise. They sketched eunuchs as willing guardians. They called the Gilman boy courtesans. What was once systemic abuse became aesthetic, a fantasy, a lie. But not all was lost. In a corner of a mosque in Fez, a court painting still survives. Beneath layers of plaster, a eunuch, half-shadowed, stands at the edge of a scene. His eyes are wide, not with reverence, but with memory. In a ruined bathhouse in Samara, a scratched verse appears on a marble pillar. She sang to forget, but the walls remembered. And in a fragment of poetry attributed to Abu Nuwas, a line long believed apocryphal has resurfaced. They bathed in faith, but dried themselves in silence. The past is never truly silent. It whispers, beneath dust, beneath denial, beneath fear. If this journey into history's shadows has opened your eyes to the fragility of civilization, subscribe for more untold stories that powerful forces tried to bury. Because the Abbasid Caliphate was not merely a kingdom of gold and knowledge, it was an empire where power, pleasure, and piety collided, and left behind cracks in the mirror of Islamic history. And, today, those cracks still shimmer, in conversations never had, in sermons carefully worded, in the silence that surrounds topics too sacred to question. What we explored here is not just a forgotten story, it's a mirror held up to the present, and somewhere, in the imagination of that eunuch, in the footsteps of the concubine, in the ink-stained hands of the librarian, a scroll once floated down the Tigris, wrapped in cloth, hidden in the folds of a servant's robe. It turned gently in the water as the stars looked down, and then vanished beneath the waves.